"I speak 10 languages," the young woman said, her hands cuffed. The judge burst into laughter. "Sure, and I'm a polyglot," he scoffed in front of the entire court. But when she opened her mouth, his laughter froze. The Ontario Superior Court of Justice had never been so full. Every seat occupied, people standing against the walls, journalists with cameras off, waiting for the exact moment to capture the day's headline. The collective murmur created a symphony of expectation that made the old Justice Building's air conditioning hum. Victoria Evans walked towards the stand, her hands cuffed. Her steps echoed in the sudden silence that fell when Bailiff Raymond Cooper shouted, "All rise. Court is in session." Everyone rose as Justice Harrison Mitchell entered through the side door, carrying a messy pile of documents. He was a robust man, with perfectly slicked-back gray hair, and the kind of expression that only years of sentencing other people's lives can sculpt onto a face. A mixture of boredom, superiority, and occasional disdain. "You may be seated," Mitchell ordered, dropping the documents onto his desk with a dry thud that startled several people present. Victoria remained standing between two bailiffs, with Eleanor Vance, her public defender, by her left side. Eleanor was a middle-aged woman carrying the weight of too many cases and too little budget. She had pronounced dark circles under her eyes, and that barely perceptible tremor in her hands that betrays an excess of caffeine and lack of sleep. "Case number 47B 2024, announced the court clerk. "The Crown versus Victoria Evans. Charges: electronic fraud, identity theft, and aggravated scam." The murmur returned to the room like a wave. Victoria felt hundreds of eyes piercing her back, judging her before any evidence was presented. She knew that feeling. She had felt it all her life. Crown Prosecutor Thomas Bradford rose with theatrical movements, adjusting his tie as if he were an actor at a play's premiere. He was a thin man with sharp features, who spoke with a polished, somewhat detached accent that immediately established hierarchies in any room. "Your Honor," Bradford began with a resonant voice, "we have before us a young woman who has perpetrated one of the most elaborate frauds this court has ever seen. For months, Miss Evans impersonated a certified translator, offering services to multinational corporations, educational institutions, and even government agencies." He paused dramatically, walking slowly in front of the jury. "She charged thousands of dollars for translations she supposedly performed in 10 different languages. 10, Your Honor. But the reality is that this young woman barely finished high school and has no certification, no degree, no credentials to support her alleged linguistic ability." Bradford turned towards Victoria with a smile that aimed to be compassionate but dripped with condescension. "We understand that economic need can lead people to make wrong decisions, but fraud is fraud, regardless of the circumstances." Victoria clenched her fists inside the cuffs. Every word from the prosecutor was like a hammer hitting her dignity, not because they were true, but because no one seemed interested in hearing her side. Justice Mitchell skimmed the documents with a bored expression, as if this were just another case on his endless list of judicial responsibilities. He yawned without bothering to cover his mouth. "Does the defense have anything to say before we proceed?" he asked in a monotonous tone, without even looking up from the papers. Eleanor Vance cleared her throat. Her hands trembled as she held her worn notebook. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. The charges presented are based on misunderstandings and lack of communication with her employers. Miss Evans is willing to demonstrate that she possesses the abilities she claims to have." "Demonstrate?" Mitchell finally looked up, his eyebrows arching with mocking interest. "And how exactly do you plan to demonstrate that she speaks 10 languages? Is she going to sing us a song in each one?" Some nervous laughter broke out from the public. The judge smiled, pleased with his own humor. "Your Honor, with due respect," Eleanor tried to continue, but Mitchell interrupted her with a wave of his hand. "Miss Vance, I have reviewed this case. Your client is 23 years old. She grew up in a low-income neighborhood and, according to records, worked cleaning offices before this alleged translation business." He looked directly at Victoria. "There is no record of higher education, no international certification, nothing to suggest that this young woman could speak even 3 languages, much less 10. It was then that Victoria raised her head. Her eyes, which had remained fixed on the floor throughout the hearing, met the judge's directly. There was fire in that gaze. There were years of humiliation, of being underestimated, of being invisible. "Permission to speak, Your Honor," she said, with a clear, firm voice. Mitchell looked at her, surprised. Most defendants remained silent during preliminary hearings, letting their lawyers speak for them. But there was something in the way this young woman looked at him that caused a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "Do you have anything relevant to add to the case?" he asked skeptically. "I speak 10 languages." Victoria pronounced each word with crystalline clarity, without an ounce of doubt in her voice. "And I can prove it right here, right now, if your honor allows me." The silence that followed was so profound that one could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights on the ceiling. Everyone present leaned forward, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And then Justice Harrison Mitchell did something no one expected. He leaned his head back and let out a burst of laughter. It wasn't polite or restrained laughter. It was a thunderous, almost hysterical guffaw that made his corpulent figure vibrate on the judge's chair. "This is incredible," he exclaimed between laughs, wiping tears from his eyes with a handkerchief. "The accused wants to demonstrate that she speaks 10 languages here in my court." Other laughs joined the judges. Prosecutor Bradford smiled broadly, shaking his head in disbelief. Some members of the public laughed openly, others whispered mocking comments. "Miss Evans," Mitchell managed to control his laughter enough to speak, though his voice still trembled with amusement. "I appreciate your creativity, but this is a court of justice, not a television talent show. We are not going to waste the court's time with circus demonstrations. Does justice seem like a circus to you?" Victoria's voice cut through the air like a knife. The judge's laughter instantly froze. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment a dangerous silence filled the room. "Excuse me?" His voice dropped to a threatening tone. Victoria took a step forward, ignoring Eleanor Vance's warning tug on her arm. "With all due respect, Your Honor, you just laughed at me without hearing me. You have judged me without allowing me to present my defense. If that's not a circus, I don't know what is." Bailiff Cooper stepped forward, ready to intervene if the situation escalated, but the judge raised a hand to stop him. Mitchell leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You have guts, Miss Evans. I'll give you that, but guts won't save you from the evidence against you." "The evidence lies," Victoria responded. "Or rather, the people who interpreted it lied because they never bothered to verify if I really could do what I claimed." "And why would we do that?" Bradford intervened from his seat. "Why should the Crown spend resources verifying the fanciful claims of someone who is clearly trying to avoid the consequences of her actions? Because that is your obligation." Victoria turned towards the prosecutor, her voice gaining strength. "Your obligation is to seek the truth, not assume guilt based on prejudice." "Order!" Mitchell banged his gavel against the desk. "Miss Evans, you are treading on dangerous ground. I suggest you remain silent before I charge you with contempt of court." Victoria took a deep breath. She could feel her heart beating so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. But she wasn't going to back down. No, this time. She had backed down all her life. "Your Honor," Eleanor Vance hastened to intervene. Her voice trembled but was determined. "I formally request that my client be allowed to demonstrate her linguistic abilities. If she can prove that she speaks the languages she claims, that would fundamentally change the nature of this case." Mitchell looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. "Miss Vance, are you really suggesting we turn this court into a language exam?" "I am suggesting we give my client the opportunity to adequately defend herself," Eleanor replied, finding a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed. "Isn't that what justice represents?" The judge leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. He looked at Victoria for a long moment, his eyes evaluating her, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. There was something about this young woman that unsettled him. It wasn't just her audacity, it was the absolute certainty in her eyes. "All right," he said finally, to the surprise of everyone in the room. "I will give you your chance to make a public fool of yourself, but when you fail, and you will fail, I will add charges of contempt of court and obstruction of justice to your already considerable list of legal problems." He turned to his clerk. "Contact the language department of the University of Toronto. I need them to send 10 professors, 1 specialist in each of the languages Miss Evans claims to speak." Victoria felt an electric shock run through her body. She would finally have her chance. Finally, someone would listen to her. "Miss Evans." Mitchell looked at her with that mocking smile he had perfected for decades. "I hope you know what you are doing. Because when this is over, not only will I declare you guilty of fraud, but everyone will know exactly what kind of liar you are." "I am not a liar," Victoria responded with a calm but firm voice. "And when this is over, you will have to apologize." The room erupted in scandalized murmurs. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Justice Mitchell like that. Silence. The gavel struck again. Mitchell looked at Victoria with a mixture of fury and something that might have been dawning respect. This hearing is postponed until the evaluators are present. It will be in 3 days. And believe me, Miss Evans, those 3 days will be the last days of freedom you will enjoy for a long time." As the bailiffs escorted her out of the room, Victoria couldn't help but wonder if she had made the biggest mistake of her life, or if she had finally taken the first step towards the vindication she so longed for. What she didn't know was that the next few days would reveal secrets that would change not only her destiny but that of everyone present in that room. The metallic clang of the doors closing echoed like thunder in Victoria's ears. The Maplewood Correctional Center was a 3-story building that smelled of industrial disinfectant mixed with human despair. The white, peeling walls seemed to absorb all natural light trying to enter through the small, barred windows. Victoria walked down the corridor flanked by 2 officers. Her handcuffs had been removed, but the feeling of oppression remained, now invisible, but heavier than any metal. Other inmates watched her from their cells, some with curiosity, others with that empty gaze that only prolonged confinement can create. "Cell 47C, announced Officer Jessica Torres, a young woman with a professional, but not cruel expression. She opened the metal door with a creak that echoed down the hallway. "You have a cellmate. I hope you get along." Victoria entered, and the door closed behind her with a definitive thud that made her flinch. The cell was small, 2 narrow bunks, a small sink, a toilet without privacy, and a window so high it only served to remind them that the outside world existed but was out of reach. On the lower bunk, a middle-aged woman looked up from a worn book. Beatrice Beestone had a face marked by lines that told stories she would probably never share. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and her eyes, though tired, still retained a spark of intelligence. "So, you're the famous polyglot," Bea said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The whole center is talking about you. The girl who defied Justice Mitchell and lived to tell the tale." Victoria sat on the upper bunk, feeling the thin, hard mattress under her body. She didn't respond immediately. She was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. The adrenaline from the hearing had evaporated, leaving only a heavy void in her chest. "I'm not famous," she finally said. "I'm just someone who got tired of being underestimated." Bea let out a dry laugh. "In here, we're all tired of something. The difference is most people have already given up. You still have fire. That's dangerous in a place like this." "Dangerous? Why?" "Because hope hurts more than resignation." Bea closed her book. "Do you really speak 10 languages?" Victoria nodded, looking at the stained cell ceiling. 11, actually, but nobody asked. 11. Bea sat up, genuinely interested. How is it possible for a girl your age to speak 11 languages? For the first time in days, Victoria felt like talking. Perhaps because Bea didn't look at her with mockery or disdain. Perhaps because in that small, claustrophobic space, they were both just 2 human beings trying to survive. "My grandmother," Victoria began, her voice softening with the memory. "Grandma Lucy. She worked all her life as a domestic helper for diplomatic families. Every time one family left, another arrived. Germans, French, Chinese, Russians, Arabs. She learned bits and pieces of all those languages to communicate, to be indispensable." Bea listened in silence, and Victoria continued. "When my parents died in a bus accident, I was 5 years old. My grandmother took me in and brought me with her to all those houses. While she cleaned, cooked, and ironed, I sat with the children of those families. I played with them, ate with them, learned with them." Her voice cracked slightly as she remembered. "The diplomats changed every 2 or 3 years. Every time I made a friend, they left. Every time I learned to communicate perfectly in one language, a new family arrived with a different language. But I never stopped learning. It was my way of keeping those memories, those connections alive." "And your grandmother?" Bea asked softly. "She died 2 years ago. Heart attack. 50 years of working sunup to sundown finally killed her." Victoria closed her eyes tightly. "And I was left alone, without formal education, without certificates to prove what I knew, only with languages in my head and no way to prove they were real." "So you started working as a translator," Bea completed. "I tried to get jobs in official agencies, but they all wanted university degrees, international certifications. No one wanted to give me even a chance to prove what I could do." The frustration was palpable in her voice. "So I started my own business. I offered my services online, charged less than the big agencies, and did impeccable work." "Then why are you here?" Victoria opened her eyes and looked directly at Bea. "Because someone decided it was impossible for a girl without a university education to do what I did. They reported my services as fraud, without even checking the quality of my work, and now I'm here waiting to prove something I never should have had to prove." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. The door opened, and Officer Torres appeared again. "Evans, you have a visitor." "Consultation room." Victoria got off the bunk, confused. She hadn't called anyone. She had no one to call. The consultation room was a small space divided by a metal table. Sitting on the other side was Eleanor Vance, her public defender, but she wasn't alone. Next to her was a woman Victoria didn't know, elegant, professional, with a leather briefcase on the table. "Victoria, this is Dr. Sarah Jenkins," Eleanor introduced. "She's a forensic psychologist. Crown Prosecutor Bradford requested a psychological evaluation before the next hearing." Victoria felt a knot forming in her stomach. Psychological evaluation? Why? Dr. Jenkins spoke in a calm, professional voice. "It's standard procedure in cases where the accused presents behaviors that could be considered unusual. Your confrontation with Justice Mitchell raised some flags." "Flags?" Victoria felt indignation rising. "Defending myself is unusual behavior? It's not about that." Eleanor intervened quickly. "Victoria, listen. The prosecutor is trying to build a profile that suggests you have tendencies towards pathological fantasy. They want to argue that you genuinely believe you speak those languages when in reality you don't." "That's ridiculous." Victoria hit the table with her palm. "I'm not crazy. No one is saying you are." Dr. Jenkins maintained her neutral tone. "But I need to do my evaluation. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." For the next hour, Victoria answered question after question about her childhood, about her parents' death, about living with her grandmother, about learning languages, about feeling alone, about her fears, her dreams, her frustrations. Dr. Jenkins took meticulous notes, her expression impossible to read. "One last question," she finally said. "Have you ever felt that people don't understand you, that you live in a world different from others?" Victoria thought carefully before answering. "Every day of my life. But not because I'm crazy, but because I've lived in worlds that most people will never experience. I've spoken in languages that most people will never learn. I've seen how words can build bridges or raise walls. So yes, I live in a different world, but it's real. It's as real as the prejudice that brought me here." The doctor closed her notebook. "Thank you for your cooperation, Victoria. I will submit my report before the hearing." When she left, Eleanor approached Victoria, her expression worried. "There's something else you need to know. Justice Mitchell contacted the University of Toronto, but it wasn't just to get evaluators." "What do you mean?" "He investigated your background further. He found something." Eleanor pulled some documents from her bag. "Years ago, when you were 17, you applied for a scholarship at the International Language Academy. Do you remember?" Victoria nodded slowly. "They rejected me. They said my application was unrealistic because I claimed to speak too many languages for my age." "Exactly. And Mitchell is using that as evidence that you've been lying about your abilities for years. He argues it's a pattern of fraudulent behavior." The room seemed to shrink around Victoria. Every time she tried to move forward, the system pushed her back. Every attempt to prove her worth became another piece of evidence against her. "Is there anything else?" she asked, fearing the answer. Eleanor hesitated before continuing. "The evaluators who will come. Mitchell specifically asked for the strictest professors, known for being extremely rigorous. They're not coming to give you a fair chance, Victoria. They're coming to dismantle you." The silence that followed was crushing. Victoria could feel the weight of the entire justice system pressing against her, trying to crush that spark of hope that still burned in her chest. "How much time do I have?" she finally asked. 2 more days. The hearing is the day after tomorrow. Then I need to use every second." Victoria stood up, her determination renewed, despite everything. "Eleanor, I need you to get me something. Books, study materials, in all the languages you can find. If they're going to make this difficult, then I'm going to prepare like never before in my life." Eleanor looked at her with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "Victoria, even if you prove you speak those languages, the prosecutor has other charges. The clients who reported fraud, the complaints about incorrect translations." "Incorrect translations?" Victoria interrupted her. "What incorrect translations?" "There are 3 clients who claim that the translations you did contained serious errors that cost them money and reputation." Victoria felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "That's impossible. I reviewed every translation 3 times. I was meticulous. I would never, ever have delivered something with serious errors. Do you have copies of those translations?" "All of them, on my computer, but the police confiscated it as evidence." Eleanor made a note. "I'm going to request access to those files. If we can prove that the translations were correct, that would dismantle part of the prosecutor's accusation." When Victoria returned to her cell, B was waiting with a curious expression. "Bad news, getting worse and worse." Victoria slumped onto her bunk. Not only do I have to prove I speak 10 languages in front of professors who have already decided I'm lying, I also have to prove that translations I know I did correctly have no errors and defend myself against a psychological evaluation that will probably paint me as delusional. B whistled softly. When you said you had fire, I wasn't kidding. But, Victoria, are you sure you want to go through with this? You could accept a plea bargain, serve a shorter sentence, move on with your life, and give up? Victoria looked at the ceiling. Accept that the world is right and I'm wrong? I can't. B. If I give up now, I'd be betraying my grandmother, all those years of learning, all those girls who, like me, have talent but no papers to prove it. Then rest, B said, turning off the cell light. Because in 2 days, you're going to need every ounce of strength you have. In the darkness, Victoria closed her eyes, but couldn't sleep. Her mind reviewed vocabulary, grammar, idioms in each of the languages she had learned. But more than that, she thought of all the times she had been underestimated, ignored, dismissed. The world was about to see what she was capable of. She just hoped it would be enough. Dawn arrived at the detention center with that heavy silence that only exists in places where freedom is a distant memory. Victoria hadn't slept. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her mind continued to process verb conjugations, grammatical structures, idiomatic expressions in Mandarin, Arabic, German, French. B snored softly in the lower bunk, a comforting sound amidst so much uncertainty. Victoria had spent the night whispering words softly, each language flowing like rivers converging in the ocean of her memory. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her concentration. It was too early for breakfast. The metal door opened, and Officer Torres appeared with a serious expression. Evans, you have a visitor. Consultation room, now. Bea woke up with a start. At this hour? Who visits someone before dawn? Victoria got off her bunk, her heart beginning to beat faster. She followed Torres through the empty corridors, the echo of their footsteps resonating like war drums. When they reached the consultation room, the surprise on Victoria's face was evident. Sitting on the other side of the table was an Asian man with an anxious expression and a business briefcase on his lap. She recognized him immediately. Engineer Chen? Victoria whispered incredulously. David Chen stood up abruptly, his hands visibly trembling. He was one of the 3 clients who had reported her translations as fraudulent. He worked for a technology company that needed documents translated from English to Mandarin for an expansion in China. Miss Evans, I need to speak with you. His voice came out in gasps, as if each word cost him physical effort. I don't have much time. My lawyer doesn't know I'm here. Torres closed the door but remained inside. Standard protocol for officially unauthorized visits. What are you doing here? Victoria sat down slowly, trying to process this surreal situation. Chen ran his hands over his face, and Victoria noticed the deep dark circles, the tension in his shoulders. I came to tell you the truth I should have told from the beginning. The silence that followed was so dense that Victoria could hear her own pulse. Your translations were perfect. Chen blurted out the words as if he had been holding his breath for months. Every document you translated for my company was impeccable, better than any professional agency we had used before. The partners in Beijing were impressed with the technical accuracy and cultural sensitivity. Victoria felt as if the ground was moving under her feet. Then why? Because my boss, the CEO, found out I had hired your services without verifying your university credentials. Chen lowered his gaze, shame evident in every line of his face. He threatened to fire me if I didn't find a way to justify why I had spent company funds on an uncertified translator, and he decided to destroy your life to save his job. Victoria felt a mixture of fury and vindication growing in her chest. It wasn't that simple. Chen looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Mr. Robert Davies, our company's corporate counsel, suggested we report the translations as defective. He said it was the only way to recover the money and protect the company from any legal liability. He suggested lying? Victoria's voice rose. He suggested protecting corporate interests. Chen corrected bitterly. In the business world, Miss Evans, truth is secondary to financial survival. But I haven't been able to sleep since I signed that false statement. I have a daughter your age. Every time I look at her, I see your face in the news, being publicly humiliated for something you didn't do. Victoria took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Why are you telling me this now? Why not before the trial? Because I'm a coward, Chen admitted with a broken voice. Because I needed my job, my salary, my reputation. But seeing what they've done to you, Seeing Justice Mitchell laughing at you on television, it was too much. My wife told me last night that she couldn't continue living with a man without honor, and she was right. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. Here's everything. Copies of the original translations with approvals from our partners in Beijing, emails where they specifically praise your work, and my sworn affidavit, admitting I lied under corporate pressure. Victoria took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavy, full of pages that could completely change her case. Engineer Chen, do you understand what this means for you? She asked softly. Admitting perjury could lead to prison. I know, Chen smiled sadly. But I'd rather be in prison with my honor intact than free as a liar. My daughter deserves a father she can be proud of. Torres approached the table. Sir, I need to escort you out. This visit is already irregular. Chen stood up, but before leaving, he looked Victoria directly in the eyes. Miss Evans, you are extraordinary. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you'll allow me a piece of advice, when you're in that courtroom tomorrow, don't just demonstrate that you speak those languages. Demonstrate why it matters. Demonstrate that real talent doesn't need certificates to be valid. When he left, Victoria remained alone in the room, clutching the envelope as if it were a lifeline. Tears she had been holding back for days finally began to fall. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief mixed with rage for all she had endured because of corporate lies. The door opened again, and Eleanor Vance rushed in, her hair disheveled and her expression of controlled panic. Victoria, what was that? Torres called me saying David Chen was here. What did he want? Victoria handed her the envelope. Our salvation. As Eleanor frantically reviewed the documents, her eyes widened with each page. This is incredible. With this, we can completely dismantle the fraud charges. We can prove that the translations were correct and that the accusations were fabricated. But will it be enough? Victoria asked. I still have to prove I speak the languages. And the prosecutor will probably say Chen is lying now to help me. You're right. Eleanor sat down, her mind working at full speed. We need more. We need to find the other 2 clients who accused you. And how do we do that from here? Eleanor pulled out her cell phone. Leave it to me. I have contacts. If Chen had a crisis of conscience, maybe the others will too. For the next few hours, while Victoria was escorted back to her cell, Eleanor worked frantically, making calls, sending emails, moving every contact she had in her legal arsenal. Back in the cell, Bia watched Victoria with curiosity. Something changed, she said simply. You have a different expression. One of my accusers came to confess that he lied. Victoria sat down, still processing everything. It turns out my translations were perfect. They falsely accused me to protect corporate interests. B whistled softly, the system protecting itself. Same old story. But this time, someone had the courage to tell the truth. Victoria looked out the small, high window. He risked everything to clear my name. And that gives you hope? It gives me more than hope. It gives me proof that I'm not crazy, that I'm not wrong, that the world is wrong about me. A metallic sound echoed down the hallway. It was the mobile library cart, which passed twice a week with books for inmates. A young woman pushed the cart, stopping at each cell. When she reached cell 47, Victoria recognized her. It was Chloe Smith, a girl of barely 19, whom she had seen in the dining hall. She had intelligent eyes, and that particular sadness of someone who has seen too much, too young. Any books you need? Chloe asked softly. Do you have anything in foreign languages? Victoria asked hopefully. Chloe's eyes lit up. Are you the girl who's going to prove she speaks 10 languages? 11, actually. I have something for you. Chloe looked nervously both ways down the hallway before pulling out a package wrapped in paper. Your lawyer asked me to bring you this. I shouldn't, but well, I believe in second chances. Victoria unwrapped the package and found 6 books in different languages: Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, and Portuguese. They weren't ordinary books, but complex legal technical texts. Your lawyer said to practice with these, Chloe whispered. The professors tomorrow are going to try to trip you up with specialized technical vocabulary. How do you know? Because one of them, Professor Alistair Finch, came here for a legal consultation a few days ago. I heard him talking to the warden about how to unmask an imposter claiming impossible linguistic abilities. Victoria's blood ran cold. Did he say anything else? He said he had prepared specialized technical texts in each language. Medical, legal, scientific vocabulary. Things only someone with years of formal university study would know. B sat up in her bunk. That's cheating. They're setting up an exam designed for you to fail. It's not cheating if they never promise to be fair. Victoria opened the first book, her eyes scanning the pages in Mandarin. "But I can learn. I've always been able to learn." "You have less than 24 hours, Chloe pointed out. "How are you going to memorize technical vocabulary in 6 languages in one day?" Victoria looked at her with that fierce determination that had kept her alive all her life. "The same way I've done everything else, by not giving up." When Chloe left, B watched Victoria open book after book, her concentration absolute. "You know what's most impressive about you," B said after a long silence. "It's not that you speak languages, it's that you never accept defeat as an option. My grandmother used to say, 'The world will tell you 1,000 times that you can't. You only need to prove it once to show that you can.'" Victoria spent the rest of the day and all night immersed in those books. She barely ate, barely moved. B brought her water, reminded her to breathe. But Victoria was in another world, a world of words, meanings, linguistic connections. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the high window, Victoria closed the last book. Her eyes were red, her body trembled with exhaustion, but there was something different in her expression. "Ready?" Bea asked. "Ready?" Victoria replied. "Torres arrived early. Evans, it's time. Your lawyer is waiting. Today's the day." As she walked down the corridors towards the exit, other inmates began to bang on their cell doors. It wasn't a threatening sound, but one of support. Many of them had heard her story. Many of them had been judged by what the system believed they were, rather than by what they really were. "Show them," someone shouted. "Don't let them crush you," another voice joined. Victoria felt a strange energy coursing through her body. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. All those anonymous faces behind the metal doors were reminders that there were more people like her, waiting for an opportunity to prove their truth. Eleanor was waiting for her in the processing area with something unexpected. "A suitcase." "What is this?" Victoria asked. "Your future, if all goes well." Eleanor opened the suitcase, revealing a professional outfit. "You're not going into that courtroom as an accused. You're going in as the professional you are." While Victoria changed, Eleanor gave her the latest news. "I found the second client. He's willing to testify that his accusation was also false. The third still hasn't responded, but 2 out of 3 is enough to create reasonable doubt." "And the psychological evaluation?" Eleanor grimaced. Dr. Jenkins submitted her report. "It's mixed. It doesn't say you're crazy, but it doesn't fully defend you either. It suggests you have an unconventional personality with high confidence in self-taught abilities. That's just a fancy way of saying they don't trust me." "Exactly. That's why you need to be perfect today. Not just good, perfect." The transport vehicle took them to the courthouse. The building looked different in the dawn light. More imposing, more intimidating, like a Roman Colosseum where gladiators fought for their lives. But Victoria was no longer the same person who had entered there days ago. Now she had proof, she had allies, and most importantly, she had the truth. The courtroom was even more crowded than the first time. News cameras filled every permitted corner. Journalists whispered among themselves. And in the front row, 10 professors from the University of Toronto waited with expressions ranging from curiosity to open disdain. Justice Mitchell entered with the same arrogance as always, but when his gaze met Victoria's, something shifted in his eyes. Perhaps he recognized that this would not be the easy victory he had anticipated. "Let the show begin," he muttered, banging his gavel. And so began the day that would change everything. Justice Mitchell's gavel echoed like a gunshot in the crowded courtroom. The collective murmur instantly died down, replaced by a tension so dense that the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. "Order in the court." Mitchell pronounced the words with that authoritative tone he had perfected over decades on the bench. His eyes swept over the crowd before resting on the 10 professors seated in a special row in front of the bench. "Professors from the University of Toronto, thank you for your presence. Today we will conduct an evaluation that, frankly, I consider a waste of time, but which the accused has insisted on carrying out." Victoria stood next to Eleanor, her posture erect despite the exhaustion she felt in every fiber of her being. 24 hours without sleep, studying technical vocabulary that most people would take years to master. But she was not most people. Professor Alistair Finch stood up, adjusting his glasses with a gesture that conveyed academic superiority. He was a slender man with slicked-back dark hair, and the expression of someone who considers formal knowledge to be the only valid knowledge. "Your Honor," he began with a clear, academic voice, "my colleagues and I have prepared a series of rigorous evaluations. It is not simply about conversing in different languages, but about demonstrating technical mastery, deep cultural understanding, and specialized translation capability." "Proceed," Mitchell gestured with his hand, leaning back in his chair, as if about to witness a cheap magic show. Finch opened a thick folder. "Miss Evans, we will begin with Mandarin. Professor Mei Lin, although a specialist in Japanese, also masters Mandarin and will evaluate this first section." A middle-aged Asian woman stood up. Professor Lin had a serene presence, but her gaze was analytical, dissecting Victoria with every passing second. The professor spoke in perfect, fluid Mandarin, asking Victoria to read a medical text and then explain its meaning in English. She handed her a document. Victoria took the paper. It was a complex medical text about cardiovascular procedures, full of technical terminology that would make any professional translator sweat. The room held its breath. Victoria read the document in silence for 30 seconds. Then, without hesitation, she began to speak in fluent Mandarin. Her pronunciation was impeccable, her tones precise. She not only read the text but explained it, adding cultural context about how certain Chinese medical terms differ in concept from Western ones. Then she switched to English without pause, translating not only the words but the deep meaning, explaining the medical implications with a level of detail that left even Professor Lin gaping with astonishment. The professor murmured something in Mandarin to Finch, commenting that Victoria's pronunciation was perfect and impossible for someone without formal training. "I know," Victoria responded in the same language, looking directly at Lin. Then she switched to English. "Because I learned from the Chen family, diplomats who lived 6 years in Beijing. Their young daughter taught me not only the language but the songs, the games, the ways of thinking. Language is not just words, Professor, it is soul." A murmur swept through the room. Journalist Marco Delgado scribbled frantically in his notebook. This was journalistic gold. "Next language," Finch said abruptly, clearly uncomfortable with what he had just witnessed. "German. Professor Lars Schmidt." Schmidt was a corpulent man with a blonde beard and a severe, typically Germanic expression. He stood up and spoke in clipped German with a deliberately complicated accent, asking Victoria to explain the clauses of a legal contract and its legal implications. He handed her a dense legal contract, full of German legal jargon, that even native lawyers would find challenging. Victoria read it, and again her response was more than perfect. She not only translated but identified potential legal problems in the contract, pointed out linguistic ambiguities that could cause disputes, and did it all while fluently alternating between German and English. Schmidt looked at her with a mixture of awe and bewilderment. He asked her in German where she had learned all that. Victoria responded in fluent German before translating into English. "From the Schneider family. Mr. Schneider was an international lawyer. His wife would let me sit in his office while he worked. I was 10 years old and read his contracts while he thought I was just drawing. I learned that legal German is like a puzzle where every word has exact weight." Eleanor Vance watched with tears in her eyes. This was more than she had hoped for. Victoria was not just demonstrating competence. She was demonstrating mastery. Arabic. Finch practically spat the word. Professor Leila Hassan. Hassan was an elegant woman with an intelligent and calculating expression. She spoke in classical Arabic, the kind used in religious and academic texts, deliberately archaic and complex. She asked Victoria to read a religious text and explain its deep philosophical meaning. It was a text with complex philosophical commentaries. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was something different in her expression. She began to recite in Arabic, her voice taking on that melodic cadence particular to the well-spoken language. She not only translated the text but explained the multiple layers of interpretation, the historical references, the theological debates the passage had generated over centuries. She spoke about how classical Arabic differs from modern Arabic, about the inherent poetry in each verse. Hassan stood up, visibly moved. "How is this possible? This requires years of theological study." "The Al-Rahman family," Victoria responded softly in English. "The father was an imam. He taught me that Arabic is not just a language, it is a way of seeing the universe, that every word has a root, history, connection to other words. It is a language that breathes poetry." Justice Mitchell no longer leaned back in his chair. He was leaning forward. His expression had changed from mockery to something that might have been involuntary respect. One after another, the professors presented their challenges. Russian with Professor Igor Volkov, who asked her to recite classical literature and explain complex literary symbolism. French with culinary and wine terminology, so specific that only a sommelier or professional chef would know. Italian with opera and music. Brazilian Portuguese with complex regional idioms. Japanese with multiple writing systems. Korean with intricate levels of formality. Each time, Victoria not only met but exceeded expectations, And each time she added that personal dimension, that learning story that revealed not only technical knowledge, but deep understanding and genuine love for each language. When Professor Volkov asked her to explain a passage of classic Russian literature, Victoria not only translated the words, but captured the melancholic soul of the text, explaining historical and emotional contexts that only someone truly immersed in Russian culture could understand. The Ivanov family, she explained. Mr. Ivanov was a literature professor. He would read Dostoevsky to me while his wife prepared borscht. I was 12 years old and cried with the stories. He told me that if you can't feel the Russian suffering in the words, you're not really reading the masters. The professor evaluating French presented her with a text about wines with terminology so specialized, it seemed designed to trip up even professional translators. Victoria not only identified every grape variety, every wine region mentioned, but explained the cultural subtleties of why certain French words to describe wine have no exact translation into English. Monsieur Dubois was a sommelier, she explained with a nostalgic smile. He would let me smell the wines while he worked. He said that the French of wine is liquid poetry. Every word evokes earth, sun, time. It is not translated, it is felt. But then came the moment that would change everything. The last language was Hebrew. Finch, who also mastered Hebrew in addition to English, stood up personally for this evaluation. He had saved what he considered his masterpiece for last. Miss Evans, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This last text is particularly challenging. It is an ancient philosophical treatise on ethics and justice, extremely complex even for dedicated scholars. He handed her the document. Victoria began to read, and suddenly her expression changed. It wasn't confusion or difficulty, it was recognition. Professor Finch, she said slowly. This text, I know this text. You know it? Finch smiled smugly. I highly doubt you've had access to ancient Hebrew philosophical manuscripts. No, the manuscript. Victoria looked up, her eyes shining with something dangerous. I know the translation, because I did it. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to stop humming. Excuse me? Finch blinked. Victoria pointed to the document. 6 years ago, when I was 17, I worked for an online translation service under a pseudonym. An anonymous client requested the translation of this philosophical treatise from ancient Hebrew to modern English. They paid well, but requested complete anonymity. I spent 3 weeks working on this, researching every word, every concept. It was one of my first professional jobs. She turned towards Finch, her voice gaining strength. And you, Professor Finch, published an academic article 4 years ago titled New Interpretations of Hebrew Ethical Texts. I read that article. You used my translation word for word without giving credit. The room erupted in scandalized murmurs. Finch visibly paled. That's an absurd accusation, he stammered. Do you have any proof? I have all my work files, Victoria responded calmly, including translation notes, preliminary versions, correspondence with the client, all saved on my computer, the same computer that is in the possession of the prosecution as evidence. Eleanor Vance jumped up. Your Honor, I request immediate access to those digital files. If what my client says is true, this not only demonstrates her competence, but exposes academic plagiarism. Prosecutor Bradford looked like a cornered animal. Your Honor, this is a distraction. It's not relevant to the case. Not relevant? Mitchell finally found his voice. Mr. Bradford, if the accused can demonstrate that one of the evaluators I chose used her work without credit, that is extremely relevant to this case. It shows that she is not only competent, but has been competent for years. He turned towards Finch, his expression now cold. Professor Finch, do you have anything to say? Finch opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. The other professors looked at him with mixtures of shock and disgust. In the academic world, plagiarism was the unforgivable sin. I received that translation from a colleague. I didn't know it was from an online service. I assumed it was public work. Assumed? Professor Hassan stood up, her voice sharp. Professor Finch, academic protocol requires verifying the source of all material. This is basic. Professor Schmidt added in a severe tone. If this is true, the University of Toronto will have to formally investigate. Mitchell banged his gavel. Order. Bailiff Cooper, bring the evidence computer. Now. While they waited, Victoria remained standing, her heart beating hard, but her expression calm. She had waited 6 years for this moment. 6 years since she saw her work published under someone else's name. She never thought justice would come this way, but life had strange ways of closing circles. Cooper returned with the laptop in an evidence bag. The court technician turned it on, and under judicial supervision, Eleanor navigated to the files Victoria indicated. It was all there. Preliminary versions of the translation dated 6 years ago, detailed notes explaining each translation decision, emails with the client, and most damning, the final version, identical word for word to what Finch had published in his supposedly original article. Mitchell examined the files personally, his expression growing darker with each document he reviewed. Finally, he looked up at Finch. "Professor, I strongly suggest you contact your union. You're going to need legal representation." He turned to the other 9 professors. "Does anyone else have doubts about Miss Evans' linguistic competence?" One by one, each professor shook their head. Professor Hassan even stood up. "Your Honor, in my 20 years evaluating linguistic competence, I have never seen anyone with the mastery this young woman has demonstrated today. She not only speaks these languages, she lives them. She understands them at levels most academics can only aspire to. And she did it without resources, without privilege, only with determination and genuine love for learning." Hassan's words resonated in the room. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. For the first time in decades, he seemed truly unsure how to proceed. "Mr. Bradford," he said finally, "do you have anything further to present?" The prosecutor stood up slowly. He knew he had lost. "Your Honor, in light of these developments, and considering that 2 of the 3 complaining clients have withdrawn their accusations and confessed to lying under corporate pressure, the prosecution requests to withdraw all charges." The murmur in the room turned into a roar. Mitchell banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! Order in my court!" When silence returned, Mitchell looked at Victoria for a long moment. In his eyes was something that had never been there before. "Miss Evans, I apologize," he began, his voice unusually soft. "This court owes you an apology. I owe you an apology. I allowed prejudice to cloud my judgment. I assumed that extraordinary talent requires institutional validation when you have demonstrated that true talent transcends institutions." He paused, as if the next words cost him physical effort to utter. "All charges against you are withdrawn. You are free of all accusations. Furthermore, I order that your computer and all your personal effects be returned to you immediately." He banged the gavel one last time. "This case is closed." The room erupted in applause. Eleanor hugged Victoria, both crying. Journalists ran towards the exits to publish the news. Professors surrounded Victoria, offering apologies, job offers, academic opportunities. But Victoria could only think of one thing. Finally, after a lifetime of being underestimated, the world had heard her voice, and that voice had spoken in 11 languages. The doors of the Maplewood Correctional Center opened with a metallic creak that sounded like heavenly music. Victoria took her first step as a free woman in days that had felt like years. The afternoon sun hit her face with an intensity that almost made her recoil. Freedom, vindication, justice. But the scene that awaited her outside was not the tranquility she had imagined. Dozens of journalists pounced on her like waves breaking against the shore, cameras flashing, microphones extending like tentacles, voices shouting questions that blended into an incomprehensible chaos. "Miss Evans, how do you feel? Is Victoria going to sue Justice Mitchell? Tell us about Professor Finch. Is it true you speak 11 languages?" Eleanor appeared by her side, forming a protective shield with her body as they tried to push their way towards the waiting vehicle. But before they could advance 2 meters, an elegant woman stood directly in their path. She was of imposing stature, perfectly coiffed silver hair, a suit that screamed power and money. Linda Harrington, according to the corporate ID she wore around her neck, CEO of Harrington Global Translation Services. "Miss Evans," her voice cut through the surrounding noise with natural authority. "I am Linda Harrington. I need to speak with you now." "Miss Harrington, my client has just been released," Eleanor intervened. "This is not the appropriate time. I understand perfectly, but what I have to tell you cannot wait." Harrington looked directly at Victoria, completely ignoring Eleanor. "Your case has generated international attention. I have 17 job offers from different countries for you, and something more important. Information about your grandmother that I believe you will want to hear." Victoria stopped dead in her tracks. "My grandmother? What do you know about my grandmother?" "Not here." Harrington pointed towards a black limousine parked discreetly, half a block away. 5 minutes of your time. If you want to leave afterwards, I will personally take you wherever you wish." Eleanor squeezed Victoria's arm in warning, but there was something in Harrington's eyes that was not threatening. It was urgency mixed with respect. "It's okay. Victoria accepted. 5 minutes. Inside the limousine, away from the chaos of journalists, Harrington handed her a leather folder. 20 years ago, I was the human resources director at one of the country's most prestigious translation agencies. Your grandmother, Lucy Reyes, applied for a position. We rejected her. Victoria felt a pang of pain in her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because we made the same mistake the system made with you. Lucy spoke 6 languages fluently, but she didn't have university degrees. We rejected her, without even properly evaluating her. She wrote me a letter after that interview, a letter I kept for 2 decades, because I was too ashamed to reread it. Harrington pulled a yellowed envelope from the folder. The handwriting was her grandmother's. Victoria would recognize it anywhere. Read it, Harrington insisted. With trembling hands, Victoria opened the envelope and began to read. Her grandmother's words flowed from the page like a river of wisdom and pain. Dear Miss Harrington, I don't blame you for rejecting me. The world operates with papers, not abilities. But I want you to know that I will dedicate my life to ensuring that my granddaughter never has to beg for opportunities she deserves. I will teach her everything I know, and someday, when she succeeds, I hope you remember that talent does not need external validation to be real. Victoria finished reading, tears rolling down her cheeks. Her grandmother had always known, always planned to prepare her for a world that would reject them both. When I saw your case in the news, Harrington continued softly, I knew immediately who you were. Lucy's granddaughter, the child she spoke to me about in that letter, and I realized I had the opportunity to correct a mistake I made 2 decades ago. What do you want from me? Victoria asked directly. I want to hire you, not as a common translator, but as director of unconventional talent. Your job will be to identify and recruit people like you, people with extraordinary abilities, but without traditional credentials, people the system ignores. The offer was tempting, almost too good to be true. But something in Harrington's expression told Victoria there was more. What else? She pressed. Harrington smiled slightly. You are perceptive. Good, there is something else. Your grandmother worked for many diplomatic families, as you know. But there is one family in particular, the Morrisons, for whom she worked during the last 5 years of her life. They were British diplomats. They left the country abruptly 3 years ago, and they left something for you, something your grandmother asked them to keep until you were ready. Mr. Morrison contacted me yesterday after seeing your case in the news. He's in the city. He wants to meet with you. Before Victoria could respond, her phone, just returned by the police, began to ring incessantly. Missed calls, text messages, social media notifications exploding. One message in particular caught her attention. It was from an unknown number with an international prefix. Miss Evans, I am Agent Samuel Cross from the International Refugee Organization. Your story has resonated with millions. We have a proposal that could change lives. Please contact me urgently. Eleanor, who had been checking her own phone, looked up with an expression of shock. Victoria, you need to see this. She showed her screen. The video of the hearing had gone viral. More than 15 million views in less than 6 hours. The hashtag number Justice for Victoria was trending worldwide. But it wasn't just that. There was another video published just minutes ago. Someone had leaked the security recordings from the detention center. In them, Victoria was clearly seen studying throughout the night, murmuring in different languages, preparing with a determination that bordered on the superhuman. The whole world is talking about you, Eleanor murmured. You're a symbol now. I don't want to be a symbol, Victoria responded in a tired voice. I just want to live my life. Too late for that, Harrington intervened pragmatically. You now have a platform. The question is, what are you going to do with it? The phone rang again. This time it was a number Victoria recognized. B, her cellmate. Victoria, I need you to come. It's urgent. B, what's wrong? It's about the warden. It turns out he also has secrets, and I think they're connected to your grandmother. But I can't talk on the phone. You have to come. The call cut off abruptly. Victoria looked at Eleanor with growing alarm. Something's wrong. B sounded scared. Before they could decide what to do, another figure appeared at the limousine window. An older man, in his late 60s, with a gentle but urgent expression, tapped on the glass softly. Harrington lowered the window. Dr. Ross. Miss Harrington, thank you for contacting me. The man spoke with a refined British accent. Miss Evans, I am Dr. Alistair Ross. I worked as the personal physician for the Morrison family for years. I also attended to your grandmother Lucy in her final months. Victoria stepped out of the limousine, feeling the world spin too fast. You knew my grandmother? I knew her very well, and there are things about her death that you need to know. Things she made me promise to tell you when the time was right. What things? Dr. Ross looked nervously around. Not here. There are people who would prefer certain information to remain buried. Your grandmother did not die of a simple heart attack, Miss Evans. There were complications that she kept secret. Complications related to something she discovered while working for the Morrisons. Victoria's heart began to pound. What did she discover? Documents. Sensitive information about trafficking networks that use diplomatic families as cover. Your grandmother reported them to the appropriate authorities, but died before she could formally testify. Victoria's world stopped. Are you saying my grandmother was? I don't know for certain, the doctor interrupted quickly. What I do know is that she left evidence stored. Evidence that the Morrisons protected after her death. And now that you are in the public eye, there are people who will want to ensure that evidence never comes to light. Eleanor stepped protectively beside Victoria. Dr. Ross, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof? I have Lucy's complete medical records, and I have the letters she wrote to me in her last days. Letters where she specifically mentions that if anything happened to her, I should contact her granddaughter when she was strong enough to handle the truth. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. This is just the beginning, Miss Evans. Your grandmother meticulously documented everything. Names, dates, trafficking routes. She stored it all in a safety deposit box in an international bank, and you are the only person authorized to open it. Victoria took the envelope, feeling its weight, not just physical, but emotional. Where is that box? Geneva, Switzerland, Helvetia, International Bank. Your grandmother gave me the exact instructions before she died. She said, when Victoria proves to the world what she is capable of, when she can no longer be ignored or silenced, then she will be ready to know the whole truth. The words resonated in the silence of the limousine. All her life, Victoria had thought her grandmother was simply a domestic worker who loved languages. But now she was discovering she had been much more, a woman who had seen injustices and had the courage to confront them, even knowing the price she might pay. Is there anything else? Dr. Ross added, his expression becoming even more serious. The third client who accused you, the one who never withdrew his charges. His name is Richard Blackwood. He works for a private security corporation with deep connections in diplomatic circles. I don't think it's a coincidence that he was the only one who maintained the accusations until the end. Are you suggesting that my accusation was orchestrated? Victoria felt a shiver run down her back. I'm suggesting that when your case became public, certain people saw an opportunity to discredit you before you could become a problem, before you could discover what your grandmother knew. Eleanor grabbed her phone. We need police protection now. But before she could make the call, a black van stopped abruptly in front of the limousine. A middle-aged man with a serious expression, a federal identification hanging from his neck, stepped out. I am Agent Samuel Cross. Miss Evans, I need you to come with me. Your life may be in danger. How did you know where to find me? Victoria asked, her survival instinct activating. Because we've been monitoring communications related to your case, and we just intercepted a very disturbing conversation. There's an active contract out on you. Someone wants to make sure you never reach Geneva. The world Victoria had just reclaimed was about to become much more dangerous, and the answers she sought were thousands of kilometers away in a safety deposit box containing secrets someone was willing to kill to protect. The decision was instantaneous. Victoria looked at Agent Cross directly in the eyes. I'm not going anywhere until I talk to B. She needs me. Miss Evans, you don't understand the gravity. Cross insisted. There are dangerous people looking for you right now, and there's a friend who risked everything to help me when no one else would, Victoria responded firmly. I won't abandon her now. Eleanor touched her arm. Victoria, maybe you should listen to the agent. I'll go with you, Dr. Ross intervened unexpectedly. If there's a connection between the warden and what your grandmother discovered, you need to know it, and I can help protect you. Harrington closed her phone. I have contacts in private security. I can have a team there in 10 minutes. Cross sighed, recognizing he had lost this battle. All right, but I'm coming with you. And if I see anything suspicious, we leave immediately. 15 minutes later, they were back at the Maplewood Correctional Center. The building Victoria had left with relief now received her with a sense of threat she hadn't felt before. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows in the white corridors. Officer Chloe Jensen, a young guard with a kind expression who had always been gentle with Victoria, awaited them at the entrance. Miss Evans, thank you for coming, she whispered nervously. Bea is very agitated. She keeps saying the warden has something to do with your grandmother. I don't understand what it means, but she insists she will only speak with you. Where is Warden Davis? Cross asked in a professional tone. In his office. He's been making calls all day. Since Miss Evans's case went viral, he's extremely nervous. Officer Jensen guided them through corridors. Victoria knew too well. When they reached cell 47C, B was sitting on her bunk, hugging her knees with an expression that mixed fear and determination. She jumped up when the door opened. Thank goodness you came. I thought maybe you wouldn't, after everything you went through here. B, what's wrong? What did you discover? Bia looked nervously at the others present. Cross showed his federal identification. Anything you say here is protected. If you have relevant information, we need to hear it. Bia took a deep breath. 2 days ago, I was cleaning near Warden Davis's office. The door was ajar, and I overheard a phone conversation. He was talking to someone about Victoria. He was saying things like, the old woman was a problem, and the granddaughter can't know what she found. Victoria's heart stopped. The old woman, was he referring to my grandmother? That's what I thought at first, but I wasn't sure. Then, today, after you were released, he was even more agitated. He made another call. This time I heard clearly. He mentioned the name Lucy Reyes, and something about documents that should never have reached her granddaughter's hands. Dr. Ross stepped forward. B, did he mention anything about the Morrisons or international networks? Yes. B nodded vigorously. He said the Morrisons were foolish to keep those papers, that they should have destroyed them when they had the chance. Cross pulled out his phone and began making urgent calls. Eleanor sat down, her mind working at full speed, processing the legal implications. But Victoria could only feel one thing: rage. Rage that her grandmother had been put in danger. Rage that possibly her death had not been natural. Rage that, even now, years later, the shadows of the past continued to haunt them. I need to talk to him, she said, her voice dangerously calm. I need to talk to Davis now. Victoria, that's not wise, Eleanor warned. I don't care about wisdom. Victoria turned to Cross. You're a federal agent. You can make it official. I need answers about my grandmother. Cross considered for a moment. Then he nodded. I'll ask some questions, but you come with me, and if it gets dangerous, we leave. Warden Arthur Davis's office was on the 3rd floor. He was a thick-set man, with thinning hair, and the kind of nervousness that only guilt can generate. When Cross entered, showing his federal identification, the color drained from his face. Agent, how can I help you? His voice trembled slightly. Warden Davis, I have some questions about Lucy Reyes. The warden blinked repeatedly. Lucy Reyes? I don't know anyone by that name. Liar. Victoria entered the office, ignoring Cross's attempt to stop her. My grandmother worked cleaning this center during the last year of her life. You knew her, and it seems you also knew what she had discovered. Davis stood up abruptly. Miss, I don't know what you're talking about. Then let me refresh your memory. Cross pulled out his recorder. I have witnesses who heard you talking about the old woman and about documents. Would you like to explain that? The warden began to sweat visibly. His eyes darted between Cross, Victoria, and the door, like a trapped animal looking for escape. I just worked here. I didn't know anything about what she did outside. But you did know something. Victoria leaned over the desk. My grandmother died 2 years ago. Her death was sudden, convenient, just before she could testify about what she had discovered. I had nothing to do with her death, Davis shouted, losing his composure. It was her heart. The doctors said so. So you did know her, Cross observed coldly. A moment ago you said you didn't know anyone by that name. Davis slumped into his chair, defeated. All right. I knew Lucy. She worked here cleaning for months. She was a good woman, quiet, but one day she came to me with information. Dangerous information. What information? Victoria felt tears threatening to escape, but she held them back with willpower. She said that while working for diplomatic families, she had seen things. Documents about people being moved illegally, families used as cover for criminal operations. She showed me copies. She asked me to help her report it to the appropriate authorities. And you did? Davis lowered his gaze, unable to face Victoria's eyes. I told her I would, but I was scared. The people involved were powerful. They had connections. They had money. So I reported her intentions to someone else. The silence that fell in the office was heavier than any verbal accusation. You betrayed her, Victoria whispered, the words barely audible. My grandmother trusted you, and you sold her out. I didn't know what they were going to do. Davis sobbed openly now. They just told me they would keep an eye on her, make sure she didn't cause problems. I never thought they would. They would kill her. Victoria finished the sentence. I don't know if they did, Davis sobbed. Her death was natural according to all reports. But I always wondered. I always lived with that doubt. Cross was already on the phone, requesting forensic teams, arrest warrants, full investigations, but Victoria could barely hear anything beyond the roar of blood in her ears. Dr. Ross placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Victoria, there's something else you need to know. Something your grandmother gave me before she died." From his briefcase, he pulled out a small, time-worn envelope. "She asked me to give it to you when you were ready. I believe this is the moment." With trembling hands, Victoria opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in her grandmother's hand, the same hand she had seen in cookbooks, in shopping notes, in messages of maternal love. "My dearest Victoria," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. It means Dr. Ross kept his promise, and it means you are finally strong enough to know the whole truth. All your life I taught you languages. I taught you that words have power, that communication builds bridges, that understanding others is understanding the world. But I never told you why it was so important to me that you learn. When I was young, I witnessed injustices I could not stop. I saw people being exploited, families being separated, innocents being harmed. And I could do nothing because I had no power, no voice, no way to be heard. But you, my love, you have something I never had. You have the gift of tongues. You can speak for those who have no voice. You can translate not just words, but injustices into justice, silence into truth. The documents I left in Geneva are not just evidence of crimes. They are voices of people who need to be heard, and you are the only one who can give them that voice. I know the path will be difficult. I know there will be people who will try to silence you, as they tried to silence me. But I also know you are stronger than I ever was. Because you not only have knowledge, you have courage. Don't cry for me, my little one. If my heart stops before I can see your triumph, I will know it was because it gave everything to prepare you. And that is enough. Every language I taught you, every story I shared, every moment we spent together, was preparing you for this moment, for when the world would finally listen to you. Now go to Geneva, open that box, tell those stories, give voice to the silenced, and when you do, you will know that your grandmother is proud, not because you speak 10 languages or 20, but because you chose to use your gift for something greater than yourself. I love you, my child. I always loved you. I will always love you. Your grandmother, Lucy. Victoria finished reading, and the tears she had held back for days finally flowed freely. They were not just tears of sadness, but of understanding, of purpose, of love that transcended even death. Bea hugged her, crying too. Eleanor had tears rolling down her cheeks. Even Cross, the hardened federal agent, had to discreetly wipe his eyes. Dr. Ross spoke softly. Your grandmother knew her time was limited. Her heart was weak, and the stress of what she had discovered made it worse. But she didn't stop. She kept documenting, kept collecting evidence, kept fighting, because she knew you would continue her work. Victoria folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest as if it were her grandmother's embrace. I'll go to Geneva, she said, her voice clear despite the tears. I'll finish what she started. You won't go alone. Harrington entered the office, her expression determined. My company has offices in Switzerland. You'll have all the protection and resources you need. And I'm coming with you, Eleanor added, as your lawyer and your friend. Me too, Bea said surprisingly. I'm being released in 2 days, and after what they did to your grandmother, I want to help. Cross closed his phone. The FBI is interested in this case. You'll have federal protection during the trip. He turned to the sobbing warden. Davis, you are arrested for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. As Davis was escorted out of his office in handcuffs, Victoria felt something change within her. She was no longer just a young woman trying to prove her worth. She was the heiress to a legacy of courage and justice. Her grandmother had planted seeds of hope in the form of languages. Now those seeds had grown into something more powerful, a voice that could not be silenced. At that moment, Harrington's phone rang. She answered briefly, her expression turning serious. It's Mrs. Morrison. She's in the city. She says she has something else your grandmother left for you, something she didn't even entrust to the bank. She wants to meet with you tonight. Victoria nodded. Each revelation brought her closer to fully understanding who her grandmother had been and what she had sacrificed. Then let's go, she said. There's no time to lose, because somewhere, in a safety deposit box in Geneva, truths awaited that would change lives, and Victoria Evans was ready to give them a voice. The hotel where Mrs. Margaret Morrison was staying was one of those places that whispered stories of lives lived with elegance and purpose. Victoria, accompanied by Eleanor, Dr. Ross, and Harrington, was received in a suite overlooking the illuminated city. Margaret Morrison was a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, blue eyes that had seen too much of the world, and that dignity that only comes from a life dedicated to serving something greater than oneself. When she saw Victoria, her eyes filled with tears. "You are exactly as she said you would be," Margaret whispered, taking Victoria's hands in hers. "Lucy spoke of you every day. She said you were her masterpiece, her living legacy. Mrs. Morrison, what do you know about my grandmother?" Margaret invited them to sit. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared tea. "Your grandmother Lucy worked for my family for 5 years. She wasn't just our employee, she was part of our family. My husband was the British ambassador, and Lucy was with us at every posting. But what no one knew is that Lucy had a special gift." "What gift?" "She could read people, understand intentions, and her knowledge of languages allowed her to overhear conversations that others believed private." Margaret paused, her eyes distant with memories. "One night, during a diplomatic reception at our house, Lucy was serving when she overheard a conversation in Russian between 2 diplomats. They were discussing a network that used diplomatic families as cover to move people against their will. The silence in the room was absolute. Lucy came to me that night, trembling. She told me everything. My husband and I were horrified. He wanted to report it immediately, but Lucy insisted on gathering more evidence first. For months, she meticulously documented everything. Names, dates, routes. She used her invisible position to be present at meetings where no one thought she understood what they were saying. "And why didn't you report it when you had enough evidence?" Margaret stood up and went to a small chest on the table. "Because we discovered that the network had connections at high levels of multiple governments. We didn't know who to trust. Then, my husband died. A sudden heart attack during a diplomatic meeting." Her voice cracked. "Officially it was his heart, but I have always wondered. Just before he died, he had said he was ready to expose everything, regardless of the consequences. Lucy was afraid after that," Margaret continued. "Afraid that the same thing would happen to her, but not afraid for herself, but afraid to leave you alone, Victoria. So she gave me this. She opened the chest and made me promise that I would only give it to you when you were strong enough, when the world was ready to listen to you." From the chest, she pulled out a small external hard drive and a thick envelope. "Here is everything. Audio recordings of diplomatic meetings where these operations were discussed, photographs, original documents, and most importantly, testimonies of victims. Lucy met and secretly helped for years." Victoria took the drive with trembling hands. It was small, but it contained the weight of entire lives. "Is there anything else?" Margaret added softly. "The box in Geneva contains the documentary evidence, but this," she pointed to the drive, "contains the voices, the real stories of people who were silenced. Lucy recorded them with permission in their own languages. She knew that you would be the one who would finally translate them, who would give them voice to the world." That night, Victoria barely slept. With headphones on, she listened hour after hour to the recordings. Voices in Mandarin, in Arabic, in Russian, in languages she knew intimately. Stories of separated families, of broken promises, of destroyed hopes, and in each recording, at the end, was her grandmother's voice, her maternal warmth, promising that their stories would be told. When dawn broke, Victoria had dry tears on her cheeks, but renewed fire in her soul. The flight to Geneva departed the next day. Victoria traveled with Eleanor, Bia, who had been released as promised, Harrington, and a security escort, coordinated by Agent Cross. The FBI had discovered that Richard Blackwood, the third client, was actually a private security operative hired to discredit Victoria before she became a public voice. He was arrested while attempting to leave the country. Geneva greeted them with grey skies, but with promises of justice. The Helvetia International Bank was a fortress of marble and steel, designed to protect secrets for generations. In a private room with a Swiss notary present, Victoria opened safety deposit box number 4721. Inside were meticulously organized folders, each labeled in her grandmother's handwriting, with names, dates, locations. But what most struck Victoria was finding at the bottom of the box a photo album, photos of herself through the years, her first day of school, learning to write in Arabic, reading books in French. Each photo had a note from her grandmother on the back. The last photo was of Victoria at 16, smiling while holding a certificate from an online translation course. The note read, "The day I knew you were ready, it just remained for the world to be ready too." Victoria hugged the album to her chest, sobbing. Eleanor embraced her, then Bea, then everyone present. It was a moment of pain and love, intertwined so deeply that there were no words in any language to adequately describe it. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Victoria, with the help of Eleanor and an international legal team, presented all the evidence to the International Court of Justice. The case caused an earthquake in diplomatic circles. 3 international networks were dismantled. 17 corrupt officials were arrested in 6 different countries. But more important than the arrests was what Victoria did with the recordings. She created a documentary titled Voices of Silence. In it, she personally translated each testimony, giving voice to those who had been silenced. She not only translated words but captured emotions, cultural contexts, the essential humanity of each story. The documentary went globally viral. More than 100 million views in the first week. Governments were forced to respond. Policies changed. Lives were saved. Ambassador Klaus Zimmermann from the United Nations personally contacted Victoria. Ms. Evans, your work has exposed injustices that governments ignored for decades. On behalf of the United Nations, I would like to offer you a position as a special human rights translator. Your job would be to give voice to people the world needs to hear. Victoria accepted, but with one condition, that the position include a program to identify and train other young talents without formal credentials. Real talent, she argued, should not need institutional validation to be recognized. Her proposal was unanimously accepted. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the same courtroom where she had once been humiliated. But this time, she was not an accused, but an invited speaker at an international conference on linguistic justice. Justice Harrison Mitchell was present at the hearing. He had retired early after his handling of Victoria's case generated investigations into other cases where he may have allowed prejudices to affect his judgment. At the end of her speech, Mitchell approached her. Ms. Evans. His voice was humble, so different from the arrogant man he had been. There is no apology sufficient for how I treated you, but I want you to know that your case changed my life. It forced me to confront prejudices I didn't even know I had. I am now working with the justice system to implement reforms that prevent other judges from making the same mistakes I made. Justice Mitchell, Victoria responded, forgiveness does not erase the harm, but it opens paths towards something better. Your recognition means more than your apologies because it demonstrates that people can change, learn, grow. They shook hands, and in that gesture was healing, not only for them but as a symbol of what the judicial system could become. Bea had rebuilt her life with Harrington's help. She now worked coordinating rehabilitation programs for unjustly incarcerated individuals. You gave me hope when I had none, she told Victoria. Now I want to give that same hope to others. Eleanor Vance received national recognition as Public Defender of the Year. But what she was most proud of were not the awards, but the letters she received from grateful clients. Inspired by her passionate defense of Victoria, Professor Finch resigned from his position after a university investigation confirmed multiple cases of plagiarism. His downfall served as a warning to other academics about the importance of integrity. David Chen, the engineer who had had the courage to confess first, established a foundation dedicated to supporting unconventional talents. Victoria taught me that honor is worth more than money or position, he explained in an interview. Chloe, the young woman from the detention center who had risked her job to help Victoria, received a full scholarship to study social work, sponsored by the program Victoria had established. A year after the day Victoria had been arrested, she stood in front of the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. She had traveled from Geneva, specifically for this moment. She placed fresh flowers on the grave and knelt. Grandma, she spoke softly, I finished what you started. The voices you helped protect are now being heard by the whole world. The networks you documented were dismantled. The people who tried to silence us failed. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees, as if nature itself was listening. But more than that, Grandma, I finally understood why you taught me all those languages. It wasn't just about words, it was about empathy, about connection, about understanding that every person, regardless of their language or origin, has a story that deserves to be heard. Victoria took the photo album from her bag, the one she had found in the safety deposit box. She opened it to the last page, where she had pasted a new photo. It was of herself, standing in front of the United Nations, surrounded by people from all corners of the world, people whose stories she had translated, whose voices she had amplified. Look, Grandma, this is what we built together. Your sacrifice was not in vain. Your legacy lives in every person who now has a voice thanks to what you taught me. As the sun set, Victoria remained there, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in years. Her grandmother had sown seeds of hope in the form of languages. Those seeds had grown into a garden of justice that would continue to flourish long after they were both gone. The next day, Victoria gave her first class in the program she had created. 30 young people from diverse backgrounds, all with extraordinary talents, but without formal credentials, looked at her with hope and admiration. "My grandmother used to tell me," Victoria began, "that talent doesn't need certificates to be real, it just needs opportunities to shine. You are here because each of you has a unique gift. My job is not to teach you, but to help you recognize the power you already have within." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Miss Evans, how do we know we are good enough?" Victoria smiled, remembering when she herself had asked that question. "Why are you here? Because you dared to try when the world told you that you couldn't. That determination, that courage, is more valuable than any university degree." Months turned into years. Victoria's program grew, expanding to 20 countries. Thousands of young talents found opportunities they otherwise never would have had. Some became translators, others cultural mediators, others human rights activists. But all shared something in common: the belief that true talent transcends credentials, and that every voice, no matter how silenced it may have been, deserves to be heard. At a special ceremony at the United Nations, Victoria received the International Human Rights Award. As she held the recognition, she thought of all the people who had made this moment possible. Her grandmother, who had sacrificed everything; Bei, who had believed in her when she was at her lowest point; Eleanor, who had fought for her against all odds; Chen, who had found courage to tell the truth. In her acceptance speech, Victoria did not talk about her achievements. She talked about her grandmother. Lucy Reyes never had a university degree. She never received official recognition for her work, but she understood something that the world is just beginning to learn: that the value of a person is not measured in certificates, but in character. Not in credentials, but in courage. Her voice cracked slightly with emotion. "This award is not mine. It is hers. It is for every person who was ever underestimated, ignored, silenced. It is a reminder that extraordinary talent can come from ordinary places, and that sometimes the most powerful people are those the world never noticed." The ovation that followed lasted a full 5 minutes. People from all over the world, connected virtually, applauded not only Victoria but all the Lucys of the world, all the grandmothers, mothers, invisible workers who had planted seeds of hope without knowing if they would ever flourish. That night, Victoria was in her apartment in Geneva, looking at the illuminated city. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Miss Evans, I'm Maria. I'm 16 years old and I live in a small village in Guatemala. I saw your documentary. I speak 5 languages that I learned from tourists who visited my village. Everyone tells me it's impossible for it to be true without formal education. But you gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I can also have a future. Can I apply to your program?" Victoria smiled with tears in her eyes. "Of course you can, Maria. Tell me your story." And as she listened to Maria's story, Victoria understood that this was her grandmother's true legacy. Not the dismantled networks or the awards received, but every individual life that was touched, every talent that was recognized, every voice that was finally heard. The cycle continued, hope multiplied, and somewhere, Victoria was sure, her grandmother Lucy was smiling. Because in the end, this was never a story about languages or injustice or trials. It was a story about love, the love of a grandmother who prepared her granddaughter to change the world. A love that transcended death, time, and circumstance. And that love, translated into 11 languages and 1,000 acts of courage, had illuminated the world.